Welcome to the Gen AI Daily Briefing for Tuesday, August 4th, 2026. The biggest competitive headline today is from China. Alibaba has released Qwen 3.8 Max, which it describes as its largest and most capable model so far, with claims that it runs alongside top systems from OpenAI, Anthropic, and strong domestic peers. The important part is not just the benchmark bragging. It's that Alibaba is continuing the Qwen pattern of broad availability rather than treating the frontier model purely as a closed product. That matters because the market is splitting into two very different stacks. On one side, tightly managed proprietary systems with premium APIs and integrated tooling. On the other, increasingly capable open or quasi-open model families that give enterprises and builders more control over fine-tuning, deployment topology, and cost. Qwen has become one of the most important families in that second camp. If Qwen 3.8 Max is even directionally as strong as Alibaba claims, it further compresses the gap between U.S. frontier labs and the best Chinese platform vendors, especially for customers who care less about brand prestige and more about inference economics plus self-hosting optionality. Next up, OpenAI published one of the more worthwhile engineering posts we've seen in a while, explaining how it built its real-time voice stack, GPT-Live, in about 6 months. The technical idea is a turnless speech interface. Instead of classic push-to-talk or waiting for end-of-utterance detection, the system continuously listens, reasons, and speaks with low enough latency to support interruption and overlap. That sounds obvious at the product layer, but architecturally it is not. You need streaming ASR, incremental decoding, fast bargain handling, and an orchestration layer that can reconcile partial hypotheses without constantly derailing the dialogue state. The big takeaway is that responsive voice is increasingly a systems problem more than a pure model problem. Once the model is good enough, the experience is dominated by jitter, endpointing mistakes, cancellation logic, and whether the stack can preserve conversational coherence under real-time updates. Expect more teams to realize that voice quality now depends as much on transport and runtime engineering as on model weights. Worth flagging on the open-source edge of the market, Hugging Face is pushing local agents with LFM 2.5-2.6b, explicitly targeting deployment on constrained hardware. The significance here is that agentic usefulness is dropping into a much smaller parameter budget. A 2.6 billion parameter model is not a universal reasoning monster, but if it can plan, call tools, and execute narrow workflows locally, that changes the calculus for enterprise and device builders. It means private, offline, or low-latency agents become possible without shipping every action to a hyperscaler. The broader trend is that the agent stack is separating into two layers, a heavyweight cloud reasoner for exceptional cases and a compact local executor for routine flows. That split is probably where a lot of practical architecture will land over the next year. On the market side, AWS is now allowing Superblocks, the vibe coding and enterprise app generation startup, to be embedded inside customer private clouds. That is more important than it sounds. It points to a model-decoupled enterprise development stack where the value is not just the foundation model, but the governed environment around it, connectors, policy, observability, data locality, human review, and deployment inside existing cloud boundaries. Enterprises have been saying for 2 years that they want AI without spraying data into someone else's SaaS plane. This is what the answer starts to look like. The strategic implication is that cloud providers are becoming hosts for AI-native app factories, not just GPU landlords. Also on infrastructure, Runware announced a modular AI data center product, the Sonic Inference Pod. Portable or semi-portable capacity has been discussed for a while, but inference growth is finally making the idea feel less gimmicky. Training still rewards giant centralized clusters, but inference has different constraints: regional placement, power availability, time to capacity, and the need to stand up specialized footprints near customers or regulated environments. A modular pod won't replace hyperscale campuses, but it could be attractive for burst deployment, sovereign use cases, or enterprises that want dedicated inference capacity without waiting years for a conventional build. The larger story is that AI infrastructure is diversifying. We're moving from one canonical data center shape towards several. Regulation also moved from theory to implementation this week. Europe's AI transparency and labeling obligations are now in effect under the AI Act. Companies must disclose when users are interacting with AI and identify AI-generated or manipulated content in more cases. For technical leaders, this is not just a legal footnote. It creates product and architecture work. Provenance metadata, watermarking or content signing strategies, UI disclosure patterns, audit logs, and policy routing so different jurisdictions get the right behavior. In practice, most teams will discover that label the AI output is easy to say and messy to operationalize once content is transformed, remixed, clipped, translated, or passed through multiple models. Expect compliance tooling to become part of the standard platform layer. On the research front, there are two memory papers worth your attention because they address a real bottleneck in agents. LiveMEM tackles state continuity for long-running inference, essentially trying to preserve a persistent memory state even as active context rolls over. Precog takes a different angle using state-space models, pre-computing document states, so retrieval could be injected in constant time instead of paying full context prefill costs on every query. The common theme is that today's agent memory is still too dependent on brute force context stuffing, summarization hacks, and expensive retrieval loops. If these ideas mature, they could materially change the economics of long-horizon agents by making memory persistent and cheap rather than repeatedly reconstructed. That would matter a lot for assistants that live with a user or a workflow over weeks rather than minutes. Finally, a trio of benchmark papers did a nice job of exposing where current evaluation is still fooling us. SWE Touch looks at coding agents in shared workspaces where a human can edit code during execution, which is much closer to reality than the standard solo agent repo benchmark. MedPress studies medical sycophancy under patient pressure in multi-turn conversations, an important safety issue because the failure mode is not ignorance but compliance with a bad request. And a separate science benchmark paper argues that some models get the right answer through shortcut, hacking rather than valid reasoning. Put those together, and the message is clear. Benchmark wins are still too easy to overinterpret. For engineering leaders, that means procurement and internal evals should test collaborative editing, noisy tools, adversarial user pressure, and process traces, not just final answer accuracy. One smaller but notable adoption signal. Congressional offices in the U.S. are reportedly paying for ChatGPT at meaningful scale. That's less interesting as a political story than as evidence that language model usage is settling into institutional muscle memory for drafting, summarization, and constituent workflows. Once public sector admins normalize a tool chain, it tends to stick. What to watch from here? First, whether Alibaba's latest coin release holds up under independent testing and triggers another wave of open model adoption. Second, whether more labs follow OpenAI in publishing systems-level details around real-time multimodal inference. Third, whether enterprise AI architecture keeps moving toward private cloud, model-agnostic deployment rather than all-in managed copilots. And fourth, whether memory and evaluation research finally starts closing the gap between flashy demos and durable production agents. That's your briefing. We'll see you tomorrow.